The sun rose slow and searing over the flat, cracked plains of southern Arizona, painting the sky in orange fire. Wind swept low across the dry land, kicking dust along the parched fences and brittle mesquite trees. The only sounds were the distant cry of a coyote and the wooden creak of a weather-worn porch swing. Enoch Graves stood barefoot in the dirt, his trousers rolled at the ankles, a chipped tin cup warming in his hands. He sipped coffee that tasted like scorched beans and ash, his pale blue eyes fixed on the horizon. His limp was subtle now, a ghost of a bullet wound earned in another lifetime, far from these quiet fields. His hands, browned by sun and cracked by labor, cradled the cup gently, like it might break, like he might. Behind him, the screen door slapped open. Martha stepped out with a basket full of laundry and the look of a woman who had fought for every inch of peace in her life and wasn't about to let it slip. Her graying hair was braided tight against her head, and her sleeves were already rolled high for the day's work. "Finish that cup and come mend the chicken coop," she said, not unkindly. "It won't fix itself with you staring into the wind." Enoch grunted. "Ain't nothing but sky worth looking at." She gave a half-smile, the kind she saved just for him. "Sky's always the same. Coop ain't." They shared a quiet moment, one of those long, unspoken ones built over years of hard soil, shared meals, and the kind of love that didn't need a lot of words. Then the moment was gone, swept up by the wind and replaced by chores, by hours that blurred one into the next. That was how life moved on the Graves homestead. Predictable, honest, hard. It was near midday when the riders came. Enoch was by the barn, hammering in a loose hinge, when he saw the dust rising along the trail. 4 of them, maybe 5, couldn't tell through the sun glare. They rode easy, like they belonged. But Enoch had seen men ride like that before. Long ago. Before Martha. Before he put away the badge and buried his guns. The lead rider raised a hand and called out, voice like molasses over gravel. "Howdy, friend. Got turned around in this damned heat. Mind if we water the horses?" Enoch squinted. Something coiled in his gut, low and cold. "Water's by the trough," he said, slow and measured. "Help yourselves." Martha appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on a rag. Enoch's heart clenched at the sight of her standing so open, so unaware. One of the younger riders tipped his hat and smiled. Enoch didn't like the smile. It was the kind that didn't need to reach the eyes. The men dismounted, pretending civility. Enoch watched as they moved, how their hands hovered near their hips, how their eyes shifted too fast. The leader, a lean man with a silver tooth and sunburnt skin, stepped close. "Nice spread you got here. Quiet. Peaceful. Bet nobody comes looking around too often, huh?" "Only ones come looking are crows and tax men," Enoch said. The silver-toothed man grinned. "We're neither." Then it happened. Fast. The man to Enoch's right turned, grabbed Martha by the wrist as she started back toward the door. She screamed, tried to pull free. Another backhanded her across the mouth. Enoch lunged, too slow. Boot met stomach. Then another. The ground hit him hard and spun, his ears ringing with the sound of cracking wood, shouts, Martha screaming. Flames came next, sharp, licking heat. Smoke choking out the sky. He saw the field blaze up in a wall of orange. His wheat, a year's work, gone in seconds. Then the horses thundered off. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Martha, thrown over one of the saddles, her gray braid trailing like a torn ribbon behind them. When he woke, the sun was low and red, bleeding over everything. His mouth was full of dirt. His ribs screamed. The coop was burning, the barn sagging, half collapsed. The chickens were gone, scattered or roasted alive. The wind had changed. It blew cold now, bitter and sharp. Enoch groaned and pushed himself upright. Every joint screamed. His left eye was swollen half shut. He staggered to the porch, one hand clinging to the railing. It snapped under his grip. He stood there, splinters biting his palm, smoke in his nostrils, and the scorched smell of his life trailing up into the sky. He looked out across the blackened field, where his wheat once danced in the wind. The horizon burned. He could still feel the boot in his ribs, the slap across Martha's face, her voice, her terror. He stood still for a long time, the kind of stillness that grows roots, that pulls something up from the bottom of a man's soul, something ancient and iron. Then he turned, walked slowly to the barn's edge. Beneath a collapsed wall, near the place the horses once slept, he knelt and began to dig. Not with a shovel, with his bare hands. The dirt gave way after a few inches, revealing a rust-stained tin box. He lifted it gently, like an old relic from a grave. He opened it with stiff fingers. Inside, a Colt Navy .36, wrapped in oilcloth. A second revolver, older but still clean. A worn leather holster. A marshal's badge, cracked down the middle. And a small photograph of a younger man in a long coat, himself, years ago, standing beside a wanted poster and a fresh noose. Enoch held the badge up to the dying light. It caught the red sun and gleamed like blood. Something inside him settled. Not peace. Not yet, but a decision. He loaded the revolver slowly. His fingers shook, not from fear, but from memory. Each bullet was like a nail in a coffin. Not for himself. For them. He strapped the holster on. It didn't fit quite right anymore. His body had changed, softened in places, broken in others, but it would do. He took one last look at the house, smoke curling from the windows. The bed he'd shared with her. The life they built. Ashes now. He stepped off the porch into the dust. The wind blew east. Toward the mountains. Toward the hell vultures. Enoch Graves, long forgotten by the world, limped into the sunset with fire behind him and vengeance ahead. And if the devil was waiting on the trail, he'd just have to move aside. Larkspur sat like a ghost along the edge of the Badlands, too stubborn to die and too tired to grow. Dust clung to the buildings like old memories, and the wind carried stories no one dared speak aloud. When Enoch Graves rode into town, limping alongside a mule that had once plowed his fields, no one looked twice at first. He didn't speak much as he tethered the mule outside the saloon, his duster hanging heavy off his shoulders. Dust and soot worked into the seams. Inside, the piano was dead, the cards were still, and 5 old men drank silence at separate tables. Enoch's boots thudded slow on the warped floorboards. Behind the bar, Saul the barkeep squinted like he was trying to remember something long buried. Enoch set a silver coin down. "I'm looking for trouble," he said, "and I reckon you know where it's headed." The barkeep didn't move, just stared at the coin like it was cursed. "Enoch Graves," he muttered. "Thought you were dead." "I was," Enoch replied. "Now I'm looking for men calling themselves the hell vultures." Saul swallowed. "Heard they rode out toward Dead Crow Ridge. Passed through 2 nights ago. Broke a rancher's jaw for a skin. Why?" Enoch nodded once, slid the coin forward. "Appreciate it." He left before anyone could stop pretending not to recognize him. The saloon door creaked behind him like a breath held too long. Outside, the sky had gone pale blue, the kind that meant heat was still rising. Next stop was the blacksmith. Rufus was still hammering iron with the same one-eyed glare he had 20 years ago. Enoch stepped up to the forge, held out his boot. "Still remember how to fit a spur?" Rufus looked up, wiped sweat from his brow. "You still remember how to ride?" "Good enough to kill." 10 minutes later, Enoch walked away with polished steel biting the heels of his boots and the rhythm of old Justice whispering in every jingle. But for the trail, he needed more than fire and steel. Salome lived on the outskirts of town, past the dry creek where wild sage grew thick. Her cabin was crooked, lined with bones and painted signs warning off trespassers. She saw him coming before he knocked. "You got nerve," she called from the porch, cradling a long rifle like it was part of her. "I've got a reason." I heard. Her voice was dry, but not unkind. "Whole town's buzzing like wasps. Said the vultures took your woman." "They did more than that." She studied him a moment. Her eyes were sharp, flint-hard and gold-brown. The rifle didn't lower. "You planning to walk into hell alone, Enoch?" "Was hoping you'd walk beside me." A long pause. Then a flicker of something, recognition, maybe regret, passed through her expression. She vanished inside. When she returned, she wore a worn duster and a knife at her hip. "I'll track," she said, "but I won't bury you." "That's fair." They rode out at dusk, the sun bleeding into the desert like a dying wound. Enoch didn't speak much, and Salome didn't ask questions. The silence between them was the kind shared by those who had survived too many things and knew that words wouldn't make the ghosts go away. By moonrise, they reached the ridge, jagged and red like a row of broken teeth. The wind shifted here, carried something foul. Smoke, flesh, ruin. Below, in a scorched arroyo, they found what was left of a caravan. 2 wagons blackened to ash, horses stripped to bone. Something whimpered beneath the wheel of the second cart. Enoch knelt. A boy, no older than 10, crawled out trembling. Dirt streaked his cheeks, and his lip was split. His shirt was torn. "They took her," he whispered. "Took my sister." Enoch placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "How many were there?" 6. Maybe more. One wore a red scarf. Had a scar down his face. They said she'd fetch a good price. Enoch's jaw tightened. Salome stood behind him, her face unreadable, the rifle cradled loosely but ready. The boy looked up at Enoch, eyes wide with something rawer than fear. "Are you going to stop them?" Enoch looked toward the horizon. "I'm not stopping, till the buzzards choke on their own." They made camp just past the ridge. Salome cooked beans over a smokeless fire, while Enoch sat sharpening a blade he hadn't touched in decades. Each stroke of stone on steel was steady, patient. "Still remember that knife?" Salome said, not looking up. "Used it on a man who tried to run in El Paso. Thought he'd bleed out before he hit the ground." Enoch didn't smile. "Man earned it." "You always gave him a chance," she said. "Used to be, anyway. I gave Martha a chance at a quiet life. Look what it got her." Salome fell quiet. The wind shifted again. Coyotes howled far off. "You remember when you quit?" she asked finally. "After that job in New Mexico. 6 outlaws and a bounty worth dying for. You left without a word. Found yourself a farm, a wife, and a church pew. I left to build something worth keeping. Now you're burning it down?" Enoch met her gaze. "No, I'm hunting what burned it down." She didn't press further, just nodded once and went back to stirring the beans. They didn't sleep much that night. Enoch dreamt of Martha's braid unraveling in the wind, of boot prints in the ash, and the sound of men laughing over the crackle of fire. Before dawn, they were on the move again. Salome found the trail fast, hoof prints angled east, toward a canyon that swallowed sound and sunlight. They passed through sun-baked washes and jagged cliffs, the world narrowing to nothing but rock and vengeance. They came upon the first sign of the vultures by a canyon spring, half a canteen, stained red. Salome picked it up, sniffed it. "Whiskey," she said. "The cheap kind. Means they ain't far." An hour later, they found one of the vultures. He was alone, slumped over a rock, his leg broken at the thigh, and a pistol just out of reach. Buzzards circled above. Salome dismounted first. "Looks like they left him to die." Enoch knelt beside him. The man stirred, eyes wild. You're him," he croaked. "The Reaper from Galveston. I don't wear that name no more." They said she'd be sold by sundown. Ain't no catching him now." Enoch pulled a flask from his coat, uncapped it. "Where?" The man coughed, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Trading shack near Diablo's Spine. Back trail, east side. They move fast. You'll be too late." "I'm never too late," Enoch said, then stood, flask untouched. The man died with a grin frozen on his face. They rode hard. The land grew more brutal, jagged. Clouds rolled in from the north, dark and brooding. Enoch didn't speak. Salome watched him sometimes, as if seeing a man unbury himself from the grave of who he once was. "You think she's still alive?" she asked. "She better be," he said. "And if she's not?" Enoch didn't answer, just spurred the mule faster, the spurs flashing like little fires behind him. The desert narrowed as they rode, drawing them through a throat of red stone and shadow. Sunlight poured down in slanted beams, catching on the edges of the canyon, like fire caught in crystal. Every hoofbeat echoed longer than the last, bouncing back like a warning. Salome rode ahead, her eyes scanning the rock walls, the sand, the lizard trails and horse sign. She was silent now, tuned to the wild. Enoch followed, hunched in the saddle, revolver loose in his lap. His back ached, ribs still tender from the beating, but he rode with grim patience. Every bend in the canyon felt tighter, every gust of wind more like breath on his neck. They passed the corpse of a snake, shriveled and stiff in the dust. Buzzards wheeled in lazy spirals above the cliffs. "They're close," Salome said, voice low. "How close?" "Close enough to smell us." He nodded once, then dismounted. Something ahead felt wrong. A flicker in the rock. Movement. Gunfire cracked. A bullet struck the mule in the neck. The animal shrieked and collapsed. Enoch hit the ground, rolled behind a rock, drew his Colt. Salome fired first, clean, sharp. A man yelped from the ledge above, fell screaming, bounced once, then didn't move. Dust rained down. More shots. Another shadow darted behind a mesquite bush. Enoch moved low and fast, surprising even himself. He flanked the bush, kicked out, knocked the man sprawling. They fought in the dust, grappling, grunting. Enoch slammed the butt of his pistol into the man's jaw. Once. Twice. Salome stood above them by the time the man went still. Her face was unreadable. "You fight like you're 30, she muttered. He wiped blood from his lip. "Hurts like I'm 60. They dragged the bodies from the trail, checked their gear. One had a red scarf around his neck, the mark of the vultures. Enoch took it, tied it around his wrist like a war banner. "They're expecting company now," Salome said. "Good. Let him know death's coming." They rode harder, leaving the dead scouts behind. The land opened wide again, low brush, sun-baked stone, and a winding trail that curled upward toward the distant shape of Blood Sun Ridge. The name came from the color it turned each evening, deep crimson, like the land itself bled under the weight of its sins. The next sign came in the form of a trail of blood. A horse had dragged someone, leaving a long crimson scar in the sand. They followed it to a dry creek where a man lay propped against a rock, coughing up rust. He tried to raise his pistol, but his arm wouldn't lift. Enoch kicked it away. The man's face was young, sunburned, and torn down the side by something sharp. "Left me," he croaked. "Said I was weak. Said dead weight don't ride." Salome crouched beside him. "You were vultures?" He nodded, spit blood. "Where's the girl?" Enoch asked. The man laughed weakly. "Which one?" Enoch's boot pressed into the wound on his thigh. The man howled. "Old mine," he gasped. "North side of the ridge. They're set in up camp. Waiting for a buyer." "How many?" "7 left. And Ezekiel." At that name, Salome went still. "Crane?" she asked. The man's eyes darted toward her. "Yeah, you know him." Her voice turned to stone. "I buried my husband because of him." Enoch stepped back. The man wheezed, tried to sit up. "You got no idea what's coming," he said, eyes wild. "Ezekiel, he ain't just a man anymore. He's the sermon and the fire. He'll burn you both." "Then we'll burn him first," Enoch said. They left the man to die. He didn't scream as they walked away. Just started praying. By twilight, they reached a ridge that overlooked a broken mining camp nestled in the basin below. Half the buildings had collapsed into themselves, wood rotted, roofs caved, rusted rails leading into the mouth of the old shaft, like veins into the mountain's heart. Smoke rose from 2 fires. Horses tethered, guards visible, voices carried on the breeze, men laughing, drinking unaware. Martha was down there somewhere. Maybe already sold. Maybe worse. Enoch squatted by a flat patch of dirt and sketched lines with his knife. "There's no back trail," Salome said. "Steep drop on every side but west." "Then west it is," he muttered. 2 guards at the outer ridge. Another by the cook fire. One near the shaft entrance. "And Ezekiel?" "Inside," Enoch said. "Waiting." Salome watched him a moment. "You sure you're ready?" "I've been ready since I smelled the smoke on my land." She nodded and sat beside him. They waited as night bled across the land, turning the sky to deep velvet, pierced by stars. The wind picked up, cool and sharp, rattling the brush. Salome pulled a flask from her coat and took a sip, passed it to Enoch. He drank. "You ever tell her?" she asked. "Tell who what?" "Martha." About who you used to be. What you used to do. Enoch stared at the firelight in the valley below. Bits and pieces. Enough to know she loved me anyway. Salome sighed. I told my husband everything. Every ugly truth. He was a preacher. Thought love meant honesty. He died honest. She nodded. Crane came through our town 10 years ago. Preached hellfire. Stirred up men who needed a devil to follow. My husband stood up to him. And paid for it. They burned him in the church he built. Silence fell heavy between them. This ain't just your fight, Enoch, she said. He met her gaze. Didn't think it was. A howl rose in the distance, wolf or wind. It was hard to say. But it stirred something in them both. The kind of cold that didn't come from weather, but from purpose. They waited for full dark. Waited until the guard started to yawn. The campfire faded to embers. And the night grew so quiet you could hear boots on sand. Then Enoch stood. No cavalry's coming, he said. Just us, Salome whispered. He looked once more toward the camp, toward the ruin, the firelight, the ghosts that waited. Then he stepped into the dark. Night swallowed the ridge in black silence. Stars hung like lanterns over the valley, the only witnesses to what was coming. Down below, the mining camp pulsed with dim orange light, fires low and lazy. Laughter echoed off canyon walls, crude, careless. They didn't know death was already among them. Enoch moved like a shadow. His boots pressed soft into sand. His breath was even, heart steady. This wasn't revenge. This was the rhythm of justice, old, patient, absolute. Every step had purpose. Every sound he didn't make was a promise. The first sentry stood near the broken water barrel, his rifle leaning against the wall. Enoch slipped behind him, one hand wrapping over the mouth, the knife sliding in clean between ribs. The man twitched once, collapsed without sound. Enoch dragged the body behind a stack of rotted crates. One down. Up on the ridge, Salome lay prone behind a boulder, her long rifle braced, eyes keen in the dark. She tracked movement below, a guard at the fire scratching his beard. When the wind paused, she squeezed the trigger. The man crumpled, his bottle shattered beside him. No one noticed for a long moment. Then someone shouted. Another stood. Salome shifted aim. Another pull. Another body dropped. Panic stirred. Enoch used it. He burst through the rear of a half-collapsed bunkhouse, his revolver barking twice. One man went down screaming, the other fumbling for a weapon that never made out of its holster. Enoch turned and disappeared back into the dark as voices began to rise in confusion. 3 left. He found one near the stables, trying to saddle a horse with shaking hands. Enoch shot him in the leg. The man screamed, fell, tried to crawl. You should have stayed in hell, Enoch said, before finishing it. Salome covered him from above, each shot as deliberate as a heartbeat. By the time the last of the outlaws fled screaming into the rocks, only silence remained, broken and eerie. Only one remained. Enoch stood at the mouth of the mine, dust coating his coat, blood on his sleeve. Inside the shaft, a faint orange glow flickered like candlelight, and a voice drifted out, smooth and sickly sweet. Brother Graves, come to tithe your soul. Ezekiel Crane stepped out from the shadows, long coat dragging, black hat gleaming with dust. His face was weathered, lips curled in the permanent sneer of a man who believed he spoke for God. A silver cross hung from his neck, caked with dried blood. I knew the Lord wouldn't let me rest till you came, he said, voice like sermon smoke. He always sends the faithful back to test me. Enoch raised his pistol. You took my wife. I gave her purpose, Crane said, arms wide. Purity through pain. You, of all men, should understand. You killed for less. I killed for the law, Enoch said. No, Crane grinned. You killed because you were good at it. They stared at each other, still as tombstones. Then Crane drew. It was fast, too fast for a man his age. The air cracked as lead flew. Enoch dove sideways, fired. Sparks lit off the stone. Crane vanished into the shadows, deeper into the mine. Enoch followed, blood blooming on his left arm. He didn't feel it, not yet. The mine's interior was tight and suffocating. Lanterns flickered on rusted nails, casting twisted shadows across warped beams and old mining gear. Enoch moved carefully, pistol raised, ears straining. Footsteps behind him. He turned too late. Crane tackled him, sent them both crashing into the dirt. Fists flew. Enoch punched, blocked, felt a rib crack under Crane's boot. The preacher laughed, eyes wide and burning. "Let the righteous be judged," he roared, and brought his gun down. The blow never landed. A scream cut through the dark. Martha. She burst from behind a stack of crates, hair wild, face streaked with soot. She held a broken glass bottle in her hands. She drove it into Crane's neck with all the strength in her bones. He reeled back, howling. Blood gushed. Enoch surged forward and emptied the last bullet into Crane's chest. The preacher stumbled, dropped to his knees, looked up at the trembling lantern light, and whispered, "Thy kingdom come." Then he fell, face first into the dust. Silence again. Martha dropped the bottle, collapsed against Enoch. He held her tight, the two of them swaying together in the dark, breath ragged. She clutched his shirt, fingers digging in. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "So did I." Outside, Salome waited, rifle slung across her shoulder. When she saw them emerge, bloody and alive, she exhaled slow and deep. Enoch staggered, clutching his side. Salome rushed to him, tore a strip from her own bandana, pressed it against the wound. "You always got a bleed on me," she muttered. He gave a half-smile. "Keeps things sentimental." They walked out together, Martha between them, past bodies and scattered gear, into the bruised light of dawn. Smoke still curled from the campfires, rising into a red-streaked sky. Enoch looked back once, eyes lingering on the shaft where Crane fell. "Burn it," he said. Salome poured lamp oil from the stores, lit a torch, and tossed it into the mine. Flames caught fast, hungrily devouring the timbers. The fire spread through the camp, climbing walls, chewing through roofs. The sun broke over the ridge, just as the mining camp became a pyre. Flames roared, rising like justice given form. The desert wind howled through the canyon, carrying smoke and ash and the final echoes of vengeance. They didn't speak as they walked away. There was nothing left to say, only the crunch of boots in sand, and the fire behind them, lighting their path home. The journey back to Larkspur was quiet. Enoch and Martha rode side by side beneath a sky smeared with gold and gray, their shadows stretching long behind them across the dust. The horses moved slow, worn from distance and silence. Neither spoke much. Words felt too small now, too sharp around the edges. What they'd lived through was a language all its own. The town came into view as the sun dipped low. Larkspur sat unchanged, still leaning westward as though bracing against the wind, still cracked and tired. No one came to greet them. No flags, no cheers. Just a few lifted glances from behind windows and swinging saloon doors, as if the townsfolk weren't sure whether they were watching ghosts or something worse. Enoch dismounted stiffly in front of what used to be the general store. His ribs still ached. Martha slid off her horse without help, dirt streaking her dress, her hands steady. They tied the reins, exchanged a look, and walked on. The world felt like it was holding its breath. Their land was black when they reached it. The fields had long since cooled, but the scent of scorched earth lingered in the air, bitter and stubborn. The house was half collapsed, porch broken, windows cracked. Smoke stains streaked the siding like dried tears. They didn't cry. Enoch rolled up his sleeves. Within a week, the front steps were rebuilt. By the second week, the coop had new walls, new chickens pecking beneath it. A neighbor left a crate of canned goods without a word. Another came by with a hammer and didn't ask questions. Martha replanted the garden with seeds someone had wrapped in cloth and left hanging on their gate. Salome helped for a while, cleared brush, fixed a fence, repaired a well pump. Then, one morning, she left a note on the kitchen table and was gone before sunrise. Enoch found her rifle missing from the wall, and her footprints pointed west. The note was short. Asterisk, you've done your part. I've got my own trail to follow. Asterisk. He stood there for a long time after reading it, then folded the paper, tucked it into his coat, and never mentioned it again. By fall, the whispers had started. In the saloon, over whiskey and cards, the story grew on its own. Some said the hell vultures were wiped out in a single hour, struck down by ghosts of the desert. Others swore a preacher turned demon called down fire upon his own men. There were those who believed a bounty hunter had returned from the dead, dragging hell behind him with a limp and a name sharp as iron. No one ever said Enoch Graves out loud, but the name hung in the air like smoke. Children played in the street with toy pistols and dust masks, shouting wild tales of midnight duels and vulture-branded outlaws. Every version was more exaggerated than the last. None were as quiet or as brutal as the truth. Enoch didn't correct them. He and Martha worked slow, rebuilding piece by piece. He rarely went into town, and when he did, he kept his hat low and his eyes soft. Folks gave him space. Respect or fear, it didn't matter much to him. His hands were full with soil and wood and the long work of making something last. One morning in early winter, while patching the barn roof, a boy from town wandered up the trail. Couldn't have been older than 9. Barefoot, freckled, bold. "Sir," the boy called out, craning his neck, "were you ever a sheriff?" Enoch squinted down from the ladder. "Why'd you ask?" "My pa said you weren't always a farmer," the boy said. "Said you used to be someone else." Enoch climbed down slow, brushed sawdust from his palms. He looked at the boy for a long moment. Not angry, not amused, just thoughtful. "I was a farmer," he said, kneeling to eye level. "Still am." The boy frowned like he didn't quite buy it, but he nodded anyway and ran off, his footsteps trailing back toward town like a kicked-up breeze. That night, Enoch sat on the porch beside Martha. The wind was soft for once, carrying the scent of sage and pine. The stars blinked slowly into view. He held her hand loosely in his own, thumb tracing the ridge of her knuckles. Her braid brushed his shoulder when she leaned against him, head resting there with the comfort of someone who no longer needed to ask where he was going next. He didn't talk much anymore. Didn't need to. The fire inside him had burned out in that canyon. All that was left now was warmth. But sometimes, when the moon rose red and the coyotes called just right, he'd hear it again, the echo of gunfire far off beyond the ridge, the memory of his name spoken in fear, the sermon of vengeance preached in bullets and blood, and he'd smile just faintly, because out there, somewhere past the scorched hills and the ruined mine, the wind still carried the last echoes of judgment, and a name no outlaw ever forgot.